Germany stands on the edge of the abyss. The streets are filled with unemployment, hunger, and hopelessness. The scars of the First World War mark not only buildings and squares, but also the hearts of millions of citizens who feel their country has abandoned them. Amid misery and uncertainty, a man emerges with an unsettling magnetism, capable of igniting passions, sowing fear, and promising a future that seems impossible. Adolf Hitler. His speeches are not just words. They are a weapon that penetrates the minds of those searching for direction, for a reason to get up each day in the midst of chaos. Every glance he meets, every applause at his rallies, reinforces the sense that something monumental is changing, that history itself is about to be rewritten by his will. Questions arise that force us to pause and look deeper. How does one man persuade an entire nation to follow his orders without questioning them? What circumstances of misery, humiliation, and chaos made it possible for Hitler to reach the Chancellorship of Germany? Who were his allies, who supported him out of fear or ambition, and who dared to resist? What exactly happened on January 30th, 1933, that transformed the Weimar Republic into a stage where absolute power began to take hold, bringing with it the shadow of a regime that would change the world? In its historical context, Germany in 1932 to 1933 is in crisis. The economy is devastated, wages plummet, and inflation continues to crush the poorest. The humiliation following the First World War weighs heavily on the nation, and the peace treaties leave scars not only on the land, but also on the collective pride. Extremist movements multiply, promising radical solutions and scapegoats for the population's suffering. The Weimar Republic, fragile and faltering, struggles to stay upright, but its decline is evident in every political conflict, every strike, and every act of violence in the streets. Hitler's rise does not occur in a vacuum. It is a phenomenon born from the combination of social despair and political skill. Every speech, every rally, every gesture is calculated to capture the attention of those most affected by misery and injustice, to transform their indignation into devotion to a leader who seems to offer absolute answers. As the nation sinks deeper into uncertainty, the atmosphere grows tense. Fear, hope, uncertainty, and fervor mix into a cocktail that threatens to explode. The atmosphere is cinematic. One can imagine hurried footsteps along cobblestone streets, empty markets, the lost gazes of children, and the elderly who do not know what to expect from the next day. In every home, one feels the murmur of despair and the longing for a savior. And there stands Hitler, like a dark beacon that guides and threatens at the same time, offering order and greatness while dragging the nation toward an uncertain destiny. The climate of desperation not only facilitates his ascent, but amplifies the psychological impact on citizens. The blend of fear and hope creates an almost emotional dependence on the leader, where every personal decision seems to align with the narrative he proposes. The sense of absolute chaos becomes fertile ground for manipulation, and every follower, aware or unaware, becomes a cog in a machine that moves inexorably toward a monumental historical change. And so, as Germany wavers, the viewer must ask, was the country destined to fall into Hitler's hands? Or was it the combination of desperation, strategy, and ambition that made the rise of one of history's most feared leaders inevitable? The stage is set, the story begins, and the viewer finds themselves trapped at the epicenter of a nation on the verge of irreversible transformation. where despair, fear, and fascination with absolute power intertwine in a dance that will mark the entire world. Germany in crisis. The year is 1932. Germany is on the brink of collapse. The streets of Berlin and industrial cities are scenes of despair. Closed factories, unemployed men, women searching for bread for their children. Inflation has left the population exhausted and without resources, and the humiliation of the First World War is still present in every conversation, in every gaze filled with frustration and resentment. The Weimar Republic seems incapable of controlling political violence in the streets, where left and right-wing paramilitaries clash, while citizens watch with fear and helplessness. The general feeling is one of abandonment and chaos. The German people need a savior, someone to restore hope, and above all, the national pride that has been trampled by years of defeat and humiliation. Amid this disorder, Hitler begins to emerge as a central figure. He is not an ordinary man. He observes the desperation of the citizens, studies their fears, desires, and hunger for power and recognition. Every rally is a carefully designed strategy, every speech a weapon that penetrates the emotions of the audience. His mind is in constant calculation, how to maximize the effect of his words, how to plant the hope of greatness where there was previously only despair. The German people do not want compassion. They want greatness, he says in his speeches, and the phrase resonates among crowds who feel understood, heard, and elevated for the first time in years. The population watches Hitler and feels that he can offer what no other politician can: order amid chaos, security against the fear of communism, and pride in the face of international humiliation. As he walks among the masses, he seems to absorb the energy of every face and convert it into political strength. His psychology is as cold as it is calculated. He perceives nerves, anxiety, and anger, and transforms them into loyalty and devotion. Every applause he receives at his rallies is not just recognition, but confirmation that his strategy is working, that despair can be transformed into power. Contemporary testimonies reflect this perception. People feel that finally someone understands their suffering, someone who speaks with authority and confidence about what Germany needs. The German people do not want compassion. They want greatness, Hitler repeats. And the words lodge themselves in the collective mind, creating a mix of admiration and fear, hope and psychological dependence. Every speech, every public gesture reinforces the sense that history is changing, that the nation is about to be guided by a firm but relentless hand. The economic and social crisis becomes fertile ground for the rise of the Nazi Party. Unemployment, hunger, corruption, and fear of communism feed resentment toward traditional institutions. Hitler perceives it all and turns the people's frustration into an instrument of power. His speeches not only promise change, but instill a sense of urgency, a need for immediate action. Germany needs a leader who is unafraid to make drastic decisions, someone willing to impose order where chaos once reigned. Meanwhile, Hitler's psychology combines personal ambition with constant reading of the public. He observes people's gestures, the tension in their hands, the murmurs of approval and rejection. Every encounter becomes an opportunity to gauge his effects, calibrate his speeches, and adjust his message. The people's despair is transformed into political fuel, and Hitler knows that only a leader who can project strength and vision will be able to conquer the chancellorship and control a nation on the edge of the abyss. The year 1932 ends with Germany trapped in a cycle of chaos, fear, and uncontrollable expectations. Between uncertainty and the need for salvation, Hitler positions himself as the figure who can embody the strength, order, and greatness that everyone longs for. His political and psychological strategies, his reading of popular despair, and his ability to turn fear into loyalty mark the beginning of an unstoppable rise that will change not only Germany's history, but the entire world. The nation, vulnerable and desperate, begins to look toward a future that seems dictated by the vision of a man who has learned to master both the masses and his own destiny. The political machinery. As 1932 progresses, Germany struggles not only with economic and social misery, but also with an increasingly unstable political network. Conservative leaders, fearful of the growth of communism and the influence of the Social Democrats, begin to see Hitler not as a danger, but as a tool that can be controlled and used for their own purposes. Hindenburg, the acting president, watches cautiously. Von Papen and other political conspirators calculate every move, weighing risks and opportunities on a power board where any mistake could mean the fall of the Weimar Republic. Political strategy becomes a game of patience, betrayal, and manipulation, a delicate balance between fear and ambition. Hitler, aware of his position, waits patiently. Every speech, every show of force by the Nazi Party increases pressure on the conservatives. He observes their hesitations, secret negotiations, and internal debates, knowing that his opportunity is near. The psychology of these men is complex. They want to take advantage of Hitler's charisma and mobilization power without losing control. They fear the chaos such an unpredictable leader could unleash, but they also feel the urgency to act before communism gains ground. Every private meeting, every letter, and every ministerial council is an opportunity to measure loyalties, test fears, and calculate future moves. Political negotiations grow tense and full of intrigue. Von Papen, in particular, watches Hitler with a mix of respect and suspicion, aware that underestimating him could be fatal. If we can box him in, control him, we can use his power for our ends, he tells himself in the shadows, planning how to place him in the chancellorship as just another pawn in his strategy. Hindenburg, for his part, balances tradition with pragmatism, analyzing every risk. Allowing Hitler to assume a position of power could be an irreversible mistake, but ignoring him could also strengthen the internal enemy, threatening to destabilize all of Germany. Meanwhile, Hitler does not act rashly. His strategic mind works like a clock. Every delay, every hesitation of the conservatives, every internal debate within the Reichstag is analyzed and turned into advantage. He knows patience is his ally, and that the perception of weakness in traditional leaders can be exploited to consolidate his rise. The tension between action and waiting creates a climate charged with political suspense. Every step taken, every move by the enemy, is a power calculation and a rehearsal for the future he envisions. Contemporary testimonies and diaries show how intense and emotionally charged these negotiations were. An advisor close to Hindenburg described the uncertainty. "We had never before seen a politician capable of mobilizing masses so quickly and with such fervor. We wondered if we could keep him within the limits we considered safe." The words reflect the mixture of admiration, fear, and anxiety that conservative leaders felt toward a man who seemed more a social phenomenon than a conventional politician. Every secret meeting and every agreement between conservatives and Hitler is an act of calculated risk. The conspirators fear that any misstep could give the young Nazi leader an irreversible advantage. For his part, Hitler uses every interaction to display superficial submission and latent ambition. He appears cooperative while strengthening his position and consolidation within the party and before the public. The dynamic becomes a game of shadows, where politics is simultaneously theater and weapon, and where every word can determine the fate of an entire nation. Finally, the political machinery moves slowly toward a breaking point. The combination of fear, manipulation, and strategic calculation lays the groundwork for a historic event: Hitler's appointment as Chancellor. Conservative leaders believe they control the situation, but their calculation ignores the cunning of a man who understands the psychology of power and knows how to transform despair, ambition, and fear into his own tool of ascent. Every decision made that year, every secret agreement, and every risk assessment contributes to an inevitable conclusion that will change the history of Germany and the entire world, demonstrating that politics, strategy, and patience can be as decisive as weapons in times of crisis. The decisive day, January 30th, 1933. January 30th, 1933, dawned in Berlin with an air heavy with uncertainty and expectation. The streets were full of rumors and whispers, a constant murmur that ran through every corner, every building, every cafe, where the nation's fate was debated. The city seemed to hold its breath as passers-by, politicians, and journalists prepared to witness a historic moment that many sensed, but few fully understood. The atmosphere was charged with tension. Misery, unemployment, and fear of communism created the perfect backdrop for the rise of a bold leader, and every gaze turned toward the heart of power, toward the chancellery that would soon receive a man destined to change history. Hitler arrived at the chancellery with a firm step, aware that this moment represented the culmination of years of strategy, patience, and manipulation. Every movement was calculated. His gesture, his posture, even the way he greeted those present, reflected a combination of confidence and political theatricality. In his mind, thoughts of triumph and anticipation intertwined. He knew that many conservative allies still doubted his control, that some rivals saw the maneuver as a monumental risk, and that his rise was being watched cautiously and warily, both inside and outside Germany. Every second of the journey to the chancellery door was a test of psychological endurance and a demonstration of power, a moment where history was woven between action and perception. The official ceremony was a carefully orchestrated act. Cameras captured every moment. Officials lined up with formality and precision, and attendees maintained an expectant silence, aware that they were witnessing the birth of a new chapter in German politics. The environment was charged with mixed emotions: superficial respect for the legality of the office, implicit fear of the uncertain future, and restrained admiration for the boldness of the new chancellor. As speeches and greetings followed one another, Hitler absorbed every reaction, gauged every gaze, and transformed the ritual into an instrument for consolidating his power. Political allies and rivals present also experienced a whirlwind of internal emotions. Von Papen, Hindenburg, and other conservative leaders mentally negotiated every word and gesture, evaluating to what extent they could control the man they had placed in power. Fear, calculation, pride, and frustration mingled. Some saw the opportunity to use Hitler as a pawn in their plans. Others sensed that they had underestimated his cunning. Every thought reflected the complexity of a moment, where immediate action mixed with long-term strategy, and where any mistake could irreversibly alter the course of history. Witnesses of that day remember the silent strength emanating from the young Chancellor. I will never forget the moment he crossed the door. It seemed like the beginning of something inevitable, a contemporary recounted decades later. The phrase encapsulates the perception of inevitability that filled the air. A man small in stature, but immense in ambition and determination, had just crossed a symbolic and real threshold. And with that gesture, German and world politics began to transform forever. Every gaze, every whisper, every decision of that day became a thread in history that still resonates in the collective memory. Meanwhile, Hitler processed every sensation with meticulous attention. The mix of solemnity, tension, and expectation provided the perfect stage to consolidate his image as an unstoppable leader. His mind not only recorded what occurred externally, but also assessed the possibilities of each ally and enemy, anticipating moves, calculating alliances, and foreseeing betrayals. The ceremony was not just a political ritual. It was a chessboard where every piece, gesture, and expression had meaning, and where he was, for the first time, the central player. The sense of inevitability was reinforced with every step he took inside the Chancellery. Officials watched him with a mix of respect and caution, and citizens who managed to observe from a distance perceived a profound change. The man who seemed to emerge from the chaos of the German crisis projected the certainty of an irreversible destiny. The city, the country, and history hung in suspense, as Berlin became the stage for an event that would affect not only Germany, but the entire world, demonstrating how a single day, a single carefully calculated moment, could mark the beginning of an era of transformation and darkness. Finally, January 30th, 1933, was established as a historic turning point. The combination of context, strategy, calculation, and psychology made that day much more than a ceremony. It was the prelude to an unstoppable rise, the first act of a drama that would change the politics, society, and morality of an entire nation. Every gaze, every thought, and every testimony of that day encapsulate the tension of a moment where action and history intertwine, reminding us that even the most legal and ceremonial events can conceal a backdrop of absolute power and decisions with monumental consequences. The immediate rise to power. From the very moment Hitler crossed the threshold of the Chancellery, his mind began to trace a detailed map of the power he had just acquired. Every office, every room, and every official became pieces on a political chessboard that he was determined to dominate with surgical precision. The political reorganization was immediate. Strategic appointments, key ministries placed in the hands of loyal allies, and a bureaucratic machine that had to be shaped in his own image. Every decision was calculated not only to consolidate his position, but also to send a forceful message to every sector of government. The man in command was not negotiable, not debatable, and not willing to tolerate prolonged opposition. The actions of that first day reflected not only political pragmatism, but also a deep understanding of the psychology of power. Hitler evaluated every resistance, every gesture of doubt from conservatives and members of the bureaucratic elite, while simultaneously building his own confidence. Every minister who accepted a position, every alliance that took shape, became reinforcement for his perception of inevitability. The initial resistance some attempted to offer appeared weak and predictable, and that underestimation of the opposition strengthened his sense of absolute control. His mind was in constant assessment. Movements, strategies, implicit threats, and visible opportunities intertwined in a continuous flow of tactical thinking. Hitler projected a mixture of charisma and authority that impacted even the most skeptical. His first words to ministers and key officials were charged with intention and urgency. It was not merely about organizing the government, but about transforming Germany from its roots, changing its identity, discipline, and obedience. Every speech, every instruction, every physical gesture within the Chancellery served a dual purpose: consolidating authority and sowing the certainty that any resistance would be useless. His closest allies perceived an unyielding determination, while opponents struggled to conceal their unease in the face of the speed and precision of the measures being implemented. The reorganization included strategic ministries and calculated appointments designed to guarantee absolute loyalty. Every portfolio was assigned with the goal of strengthening the Nazi machinery: propaganda, economy, interior, defense. Every critical sector was placed in the hands of those who shared Hitler's vision, or who, at the very least, would be forced to obey it. The consolidation of power was carried out not only through imposition, but through a combination of fear, respect, and the spectacle of authority that each administrative act projected both inside and outside the government. The first days became a dress rehearsal for what would be the total transformation of Germany, a reminder that in politics, speed and boldness are weapons as powerful as laws themselves. Meanwhile, internally, Hitler reflected on the fragility of his adversaries and the ease with which he could maneuver within a system others considered rigid. His confidence grew with each step. Every minister who accepted his authority, every official who yielded to his demands, every resistance that showed weakness reinforced his belief that his vision could be implemented without significant obstacles. Cold calculation and the emotion of triumph blended in his mind. Each action was an act of consolidating a power that for many still seemed temporary, but which he perceived as irreversible. The new Chancellor's public speeches and declarations also reflected this determination. With clarity and no ambiguity, he proclaimed his vision for the future. "Give me 4 years and you will not recognize Germany," he said with fervor. A statement that not only described a political plan, but also conveyed an implicit warning to all who might question his authority. Each word was an instrument of persuasion and intimidation, a mixture of promise and threat, designed to reshape Germany's perception of itself and of its leadership. As the days went by, immediate action combined with strategic psychology, consolidation of ministries, control of officials, elimination of resistance, and long-term planning. The speed with which Hitler acted impressed even his most experienced allies, who saw in his determination something beyond ambition, a meticulously executed vision in which every movement was an indispensable piece for constructing a new order. Hitler's confidence grew with each gesture, each decree, and each look of recognition or fear. In his mind, Germany was already beginning to transform, even though many were still unaware that change was already underway. This first period of immediate power laid the foundations for what would become Nazi Germany, a reorganized country under an implacable leadership where rapid action, strategic intelligence, and the perception of inevitability became tools of power, as decisive as any law. Every move Hitler made from that first day onward was a mixture of boldness and calculation, of psychology and action, a reminder that the consolidation of absolute power begins with immediate, precise, and symbolically impactful decisions that resonate far beyond the Chancellor's office, the inner circle. From the very first days in power, Hitler understood that his authority could not be consolidated through speeches and decrees alone. He needed a circle of trust, a group of men and women who shared his vision, his ambition, and his willingness to execute orders without question. Among them, Joseph Goebbels became the architect of the German people's mind, the master of propaganda who transformed words into weapons and emotions into obedience. His role was not only to persuade, but to shape the perception of millions, direct the national narrative, and construct the illusion of a Germany united under absolute leadership. The relationship between Goebbels and Hitler was almost religious, a practical devotion intertwined with admiration for the strategic skill of his leader. Hermann Göring, for his part, embodied the visible strength and power of the Reich. As Reichsmarschall and commander of the Luftwaffe, his presence imposed respect and fear. But behind his image of extravagance and excess hid addiction, unrestrained ambition, and a constant fear of losing Hitler's favor. Every aerial defeat, every strategic error affected not only the war, but eroded his ego and his position within the inner circle. For Göring, serving Hitler was both an honor and a sentence, a constant game of calculation, power, and psychological survival. His face reflected the duality of glory and vulnerability that defined every member of that elite group. Heinrich Himmler operated from the shadows, constructing the machinery of terror that would consolidate total control of the Reich. His role was methodical, distant, efficient, to organize and administer the repressive apparatus that eliminated all opposition, ensuring that loyalty to Hitler was imposed not only through admiration, but through fear. Cold and calculating, Himmler viewed violence and death as instruments of order and discipline. His mind structured horror with bureaucratic precision, and each decision reinforced the perception of an invincible Reich. His power lay not only in the efficiency of his operations, but in the certainty that each act of terror served to strengthen Hitler's authority. Martin Bormann, in contrast, was the invisible shadow who controlled access to the Führer and shaped the internal dynamics of power. From his position as private secretary, he manipulated relationships, filtered information, and decided who could influence Hitler and who could not. No one reached the leader without passing through him. And in that gatekeeping role, Bormann became indispensable. His silent influence exerted strategic control over the inner circle, ensuring that Hitler's decisions were made within a carefully managed framework where every loyalty and ambition could be monitored, calculated, and used as needed. Every member of the inner circle had their own fears, ambitions, and certainties. While the world watched, they built power from the intimacy of unbreakable obedience. Every strategy, every political maneuver, every implemented decree depended on the coordination and loyalty of these individuals who understood that their fate was irrevocably tied to Hitler's. The combination of strength, manipulation, terror, and administrative efficiency made this circle the backbone of a regime that aspired to transform everything. The introspection of each member revealed the complexities of loyalty. Some felt pride in executing orders, others unrestrained ambition, others a constant fear of betrayal or failure. Every decision, every action, every calculated glance was part of a network in which absolute obedience blended with personal strategy and survival, within an environment of extreme power. Their unity was not natural, but forged through the convergence of interests, forced loyalty, and respect for Hitler's leadership. Goebbels, in particular, summarized that dynamic in a phrase that would define the essence of the circle. In his gaze there was no doubt, only an unbreakable will. That gaze, shared by all the close members, represented a centralized and concentrated power in which personal conviction was subordinated to the Führer's project. Hitler's strength was not his alone. It depended on the efficiency, ambition, and unwavering loyalty of those around him, each playing an indispensable role in building a Reich that sought to dominate history. The consolidation of power through this inner circle was not only political, but psychological. Each member represented a piece of a puzzle where control, influence, and survival were inextricably intertwined. The combination of charisma, fear, strategy, and absolute loyalty transformed Hitler from a political leader into an almost omnipotent figure, and his inner circle into the essential machinery that turned his ambitions into tangible reality. The unity of this group not only defined the present of the Reich, but determined the foundations of the terror, obedience, and tragedy that would soon fall upon Europe. Reaction of the people. The streets of Berlin and many other German cities were filled with crowds cheering the new Chancellor, confusing hope with blind jubilation. In the year 1933, a nation battered by economic crisis, massive unemployment, and the humiliation following the First World War, sought a savior. Every speech Hitler gave was received as a revelation. Every gesture, every promise seemed to restore the nation's lost pride. Citizens, many unaware of the full implications of what was happening, saw in their leader the figure who could rebuild a broken country, restore national honor, and offer stability amid political chaos. See the marches, parades, and public events became ceremonies of collective worship, where the overflowing emotion of the masses concealed the seed of absolute control. Flags waved, bells rang, and music set an almost hypnotic rhythm. Popular enthusiasm was tangible, almost electric, as millions of Germans believed they were celebrating a promising future. Amid applause and cheers, few paused to question the direction in which the nation was heading. And even fewer could imagine that this euphoria concealed the rise of a totalitarian regime that would restrict their freedoms and turn fear into an instrument of power. Within this atmosphere of hope and celebration, individual thought was subordinated to the collective. People saw themselves reflected in Hitler's figure, projecting their own desires, fears, and frustrations onto a man who promised quick solutions and grand gestures. The psychology of the people was complex. Fear of change, relief at the prospect of stability, a restored sense of pride, and an almost complete ignorance of what the consolidation of power would mean for their lives. Every salute, every patriotic song, every march in the square reinforced the illusion of unity, while an unprecedented system of political and social control was taking shape. Amid the fervor and celebrations, some observers began to sense an unsettling omen. The collective emotion had a dark undertone, a leadership fueled by applause, seeking not only political obedience, but also the emotional and psychological devotion of the people. The masses did not yet see that their enthusiasm could be manipulated, that every gesture of joy was also a tool to strengthen the Führer's absolute power. The bells rang as if they were celebrating the future. Without knowing, they were celebrating their ruin, later recalled witnesses who understood too late the true meaning of those days. The contrast between the euphoria of the crowd and the shadow beginning to spread over Germany was profound. The celebrations offered a false sense of security. Citizens believed they were participating in the construction of a strong nation, unaware that they were being dragged into a system where loyalty would be mandatory, dissent punished, and everyday life controlled by an intrusive regime. Every cheer and every applause fed the machinery of power that was moving silently but inexorably, preparing to transform popular hope into systematic submission. The emotional impact of these early reactions from the people set the tone for what was to come. Fascination, faith, and blind devotion became instruments of power that the leaders of the regime knew how to exploit with precision. The collective psyche was being shaped under the influence of propaganda and the theatricality of public events. Citizens not only supported the leader, but also became unconscious accomplices in his political consolidation. Emotional manipulation was as effective as any decree or law, marking the beginning of an absolute control that would affect every aspect of German life in the years that followed. Every glance, every smile, and every applause was part of a carefully constructed scene, where the emotion of the crowd was as vital as the political decisions made in the halls of power. The interaction between the collective psychology and the strategies of Hitler's inner circle demonstrated how popular perception could be shaped to serve the regime's interests. In this environment, the hope of the people was genuine, but their ignorance of the immediate future created a troubling paradox. They celebrated the return of greatness without knowing that the same fervor would be used to consolidate their own subjugation. The memory of these reactions from the people serves as a historical warning. Emotion, enthusiasm, and faith in a leader can become tools of control when combined with strategic manipulation. The euphoria of 1933 marked a decisive moment where celebration and ominous foreboding coexisted in the streets, in the squares, and in homes, foreshadowing the rise of an absolute power that would change Germany and the world forever. The story of these early reactions shows how collective emotion can be both hope and a prelude to tragedy, and how the perception of a bright future can conceal the foundations of a totalitarian system few imagined at the time. Immediate consequences. The first days after Hitler's rise to power marked the beginning of a radical change in Germany. What seemed like a normal political transition quickly became the erosion of fundamental freedoms. The democratic institutions of the Weimar Republic began to show cracks, while the new government imposed decrees that, on the surface, sought order and security, but in reality paved the way toward an absolute dictatorship. Each measure, each enacted law, was received with a mixture of acceptance and fear by a people weary of crisis and unemployment, without fully realizing that their freedom was being undermined. From a psychological standpoint, citizens lived in an ambivalent state: relief at the promise of stability and order, fear of the unknown, and fascination with a leadership that appeared capable of restoring national pride. The decrees, often presented as solutions to disorder and chaos, were perceived as necessary, even though they concealed the gradual transformation of democracy into dictatorship. The population, exhausted by years of crisis, accepted the concentration of power as a lesser evil, unaware that each measure was designing a system of absolute control, where obedience and submission would be demanded by the force of law and propaganda. The official documents of the time reflect this intention to consolidate power. Each decree was another stone in the wall that would enclose Germany, a contemporary witness would recall, describing the sense of helplessness that permeated offices, streets, and homes. From decrees limiting freedom of the press to laws restricting the right of assembly and the political activity of opponents, each action appeared justified by the need to protect the country from internal and external enemies. However, the cumulative effect of these measures was clear. Democracy was being replaced by an authoritarian system that concentrated power in the hands of the Führer and his inner circle. In practice, these changes were not limited to the legal sphere. They also affected daily life. The psychology of fear blended with the normalization of obedience. Citizens began to practice self-censorship, avoiding any criticism or comment that might be interpreted as dissent, while political leaders and administrative officials carried out orders without questioning them. The perception of authority changed. What had once been an elected government was now seen as an absolute, untouchable, and omnipresent power, capable of deciding the life and death of those who opposed it. Institutional transformation was complemented by the consolidation of key figures within the regime. Members of Hitler's inner circle, such as Goebbels, Goering, and Himmler, began to occupy strategic positions in ministries and state agencies, ensuring that every decree was executed without resistance. This integration of legislation, propaganda, and bureaucratic control consolidated the dictatorship before most of the population could clearly perceive it. Every government action was a calculated step toward the centralization of power, while the people unknowingly accepted the gradual loss of fundamental rights. The psychological impact on opponents was devastating. Those who still believed in democracy saw their spaces of influence and participation rapidly diminish. The threat of reprisals, surveillance, and censorship created an atmosphere of constant fear, where even critical thought became a risk. The transformation of the nation was not only political, but also mental, a systematic process that shaped the behavior, perception, and capacity for action of each citizen. Every decree not only built an authoritarian legal framework, but also constructed a social climate of obedience and self-censorship. Finally, these immediate consequences demonstrated that Hitler's rise was neither an accident nor a superficial change. It was a strategic, carefully planned process in which each decree, each measure, and each administrative reorganization had a clear purpose: to replace democracy with a totalitarian regime that fused political power with the psychology of fear and submission. Freedoms dissolved rapidly, and the people, trapped between hope and fear, began living in a country where absolute control became the new normal. Each decree, each law, and each order formed part of a larger plan, in which the concentrated power of the Führer emerged as the definitive force that would shape the history of Germany and the world in the years to come. January 30th, 1933 was not just another day. It was a turning point in the history of Germany and the world. That day, Hitler crossed the threshold of the Chancellery, And with every step he took, history began to change irreversibly. What for many seemed like a simple political shift was transforming into the beginning of a process that would alter the lives of millions, marking the path toward the consolidation of a totalitarian regime. The combination of charisma, manipulation, and social context allowed a man with extreme ideas and calculated strategies to begin weaving a network of power that would trap an entire nation. The immediate impact on society was profound. Freedoms eroded, democratic politics began to be replaced by authoritarian decrees, and mechanisms of fear settled into the daily lives of citizens. Psychological manipulation and propaganda worked in parallel with political action, creating an environment where obedience was more than an expectation. It became a necessity for survival. History shows that great changes do not always occur dramatically and visibly. Sometimes they are built with seemingly routine decisions, with decrees, laws, and bureaucratic maneuvers that, taken together, transform an entire country. From a moral perspective, January 30th, 1933, reminds us how history can be shaped by a combination of fate, fear, and strategy. The conservative leaders who facilitated Hitler's rise, the citizens who saw hope in him, and the regime's own strategists all acted within a context of expectations and miscalculations. Every action and every decision contributed to the creation of a system that, although it seemed inevitable to some at the time, represented the beginning of a tragedy that few could foresee. On January 30th, the streets of Berlin still breathed peace. People went to work, markets operated, and daily life continued its course. But beneath that surface, history had lit a fuse that would consume Europe and the entire world in the years that followed. What began as a calculated political step became the first link in a chain of events that led to war, genocide, and massive suffering. Every gesture, every word, and every salute that day contributed to making the future tragedy a reality. Reflecting on that moment means understanding not only the power of an individual, but also the collective responsibility and social dynamics that allow authoritarian regimes to emerge. It is a reminder of how the manipulation of fear and the exploitation of desperation can lead to catastrophic results. It is also a call for historical and moral vigilance, to study, understand, and never forget how small political decisions can trigger enormous and devastating consequences. That day, Germany still appeared to breathe normality, but history was already in motion, lighting the fuse of a global tragedy that would change the world's perception of power, obedience, and human evil. The memory of that moment compels us to examine how fear and hope can be used as tools of manipulation, and how history can repeat itself if it is not remembered with detail and rigor. Every testimony, every document, every account from the era shows us the fragility of democracy in the face of ambition and the calculated strategy of those who seek absolute power. Finally, this reflection does not end with history itself, but invites us to action in the present. Remembering these events and understanding them deeply is a responsibility that transcends generations. And as we analyze January 30th, 1933, we must commit ourselves to keeping historical memory alive, to learning from mistakes, and to ensuring that civic vigilance, education, and collective awareness never allow history to repeat its darkest chapters. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment if you enjoyed the video. Your support helps us continue sharing more stories that deserve to be remembered.